The boys shared the loft above the printing shop. It was reached only by a ladder, but was large, comfortable, and had a big fireplace. There was one odd thing about this attic, and that was the number of chairs stored there. He started to ask Rab why this was, but thought better of it. And at last, Rab told him. It was here in the attic, ever and anon, the Boston observers met. It was a secret club, as powerful as any in Boston, and here in the last few years had been matched much treason, as the Tories called it. Rab did not even tell Johnny to keep his mouth shut. He knew he would. Breakfast they made for themselves. Dinner was sent over by Mrs. Lorne. Supper they either got for themselves or ate at Aunt and Uncle's. Rab's aunt was a plump, red-headed, white-skinned woman. She must have been a variation of a well-known family pattern, for Johnny often heard people say, as they looked at Rab, "That boy is a regular Silsby from Lexington." If he was, then she was not. But her 8-month-old son was. He was the longest baby Johnny had ever seen, had the straightest black hair, cried the least, and ate the fastest. Never fussed, and watched the world through enigmatic, questioning, dark eyes. Even Uncle Lorne, who might have preferred that his only child should have repeated the fox-like, scholarly brightness of his own face, admitted, as he looked thoughtfully at his baby, "That child of yours, Jennifer, is a regular Silsby of Lexington." Johnny became absorbed in Goblin. He was afraid the stable boys at the Afric Queen struck at him, bullied him because he was timid, so he took upon himself the feeding and care of the animal. This saved Mr. Lorne a few pennies a week on the board bill, and he generously gave the money to Johnny. The landlord at the Queen liked the boy. When guests wished a letter delivered faster than the dawdling post-riders, he would recommend Johnny. So once that fall, he rode as far as Worcester, and again to Plymouth. This money was divided between the owner of the horse and the rider, and Johnny bought himself spurs, boots, and a fur-lined surtout, all second-hand. Although Johnny held the reins in his left hand, as Rab had taught him, many times the horse was off on a wild tear, and he was struggling to get him once more under control. He was forced to use his crippled hand. He could not keep it proudly in his pocket while careening about on a horse like Goblin. Although too badly injured ever to be skillful again, it was no longer in danger of atrophying, as it had been in Johnny's pocket. As a silversmith, he had already learned to use his left hand a certain amount. Rab never said to him, "Now, Johnny, you've got to learn to write with your left hand." But he would give him things to copy, take it for granted that he could, and he did. For the first 4 days of every week, Johnny was his own master. He spent his time exercising his horse, unless he got an order to ride express for the Afric Queen, in learning to write with his left hand, and an orgy of reading. Mr. Lorne had a fine library. It was as if Johnny had been starved before and never known it. He read anything, everything. Bound back copies of The Observer, Paradise Lost, Robinson Crusoe. Once more, for that was one of the books Rab had brought him to read in jail. Tom Jones, and Locke's Essays on Human Understanding. Hutchinson's History of Massachusetts Bay, Chemical Essays, Spectator Papers, books on midwifery, and manners for young ladies, Pope's Iliad. It was a world of which he never had guessed while living with the Laphams, and now he remembered with gratitude how his mother had struggled to teach him so that this world might not be forever closed to him, how she had made him read to her when he would rather have been playing. Poor woman! Her books had been few and mostly dull. So he sat for hours in the Lornes' sunny parlor, the books about him stretching to the ceiling. Mrs. Lorne never called to him to help her in the kitchen. She, Uncle Lorne, and Rab all took it for granted that Johnny ought to read. Mrs. Lapham could not have borne the sight of so idle a boy, but Aunt Lorne never interrupted him except to come in now and then with a plate of hot gingerbread or seed cakes, and once in a long time ask him if he would mind the baby as she went out marketing or visiting. "I'll just put the baby in this cradle here, and if he doesn't go right to sleep, you rock him a little with your foot." The first time he read Tom Jones, he got so excited he absent-mindedly rocked the baby for half an hour. But even this did not upset that regular Silsby of Lexington. The baby gulped a little, but took it philosophically, just like Rab. Secretly, and only when alone, Johnny began calling him Rabbit. It was easy for him to love, and he loved the baby. He would have died before he would have let anyone guess he was so simple, but Aunt Lorne knew. Sometimes she would come into the kitchen quietly and hear Johnny holding long, one-sided conversations with Rabbit. When she came into the room where he was with the child, he would merely say scornfully, "Aunt Lorne, I think it is wet," and pretend to be lost in his book. Then she would feel so fond of the lonely boy, who never knew he was lonely, and so amused at his pretense of scorn for something he in his heart loved, she could not help but kiss him. She always kissed him where his hair began to grow in the middle of his forehead. He had never known until she told him that he had a widow's peak, which she assured him was a great mark of beauty. "Why, I'd give anything for a widow's peak," she would say. "I'd give a plate of cookies." And off she would waddle, for she was tiny-footed and too plump, and come back with the cookies. Johnny thought Rab was lucky to have an aunt like that.